Welcome everyone who's joining. We will be starting momentarily. We love all of the comments in the chat already. That's going to be a great function for you to use going forward.
Hi, everyone. Well, good morning from us and good evening for you guys. So we are in Townsville in Australia. So we currently it's 8 a.m. in the morning for us, whereas it's in the evening for you guys over in the US. So firstly, my name's Katie. I'm part of the education team here at Reef HQ Aquarium, which is in Townsville, Australia. And I am joined by Julie today. Julie's going to help me with monitoring any questions that you happen to have. Now, first thing I always like to do when I'm starting a video conference is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm presenting to you from. Oh, and yep. There we go. So that's the Walgarookaba and the Bindle people here in Townsville, Australia. And we like to acknowledge their traditional elders, past, present, and emerging. And since this is an international video conference today, we also like to acknowledge all of the traditional owners from the land that you guys are watching from today. Now, very shortly, I'll do a quick brief intro about the Great Barrier Reef, and then we're going to jump on into our coral reef exhibit and our predator tank here at Reef HQ Aquarium. But first, we do have Megan Waters from Turning the Page that just wants to do a quick intro for you. So I'm just going to quickly spotlight her video. Here we go. Hi, Megan, over to you.
Thank you so much for passing it over to me. And thank you so much for all of our families and students who are joining us today. We are thankful for the Australian Embassy for connecting us with the Great Barrier Marine Reef Authority and getting to do this dive today and learning more about not only the culture, but the creatures of who are in the reef. I am going to tell you really quickly who Turning the Page is. So if you're not familiar, or if you are familiar and have been working with us all year, just a reminder that Turning the Page has worked across the past 23 years to develop a system that uniquely engages public school parents as educators through resource-rich programming, maximizing parents' involvement in their children's learning. Now, we in the US are still very much at home, which is a slightly different than Australia. And so, as we're at home, Turning the Page has used our digital hub to engage with content that helps parents support their children on topics such as motivation, health, STEM, literacy, and more. We also do one-on-one phone calls that are mobile meetings tailored to support parents with at-home learning and family or room events like this one, as well as authors visits and parent workshops. And since April, have done 26. We've, in addition, because we cannot forget the most important part of why we're called Turning the Page, have delivered 3,492 books to 504 families in the Washington, D.C. area. We are so lucky to also, for all of our DC families that are joining, be able to give you a book from the Australian Embassy that goes along with learning about Australia and the reef itself. So we are so thankful that you all are here. If you have questions or want to join our digital hub for resources and events like this one, please text the number on the screen. My colleague Jen is also going to put it in the chat box. But we are so ready to have a deep dive into what Australia has to offer. I know I'm excited and thrilled to be getting to meet some special creatures and some special people that are abroad. So thank you again for having us. And I'm going to pass it back over to Reef Ed and you all.
All right, thank you for that one, Megan. So what we're going to do now is get started and teaching you a little bit about the Great Barrier Reef. So we're here in Townsville at Reef HQ Aquarium, and we're going to take you inside some of our tanks where you can see those animals up close and personal. Now, firstly, with the Great Barrier Reef, it is really, really large, and it runs all along the coast of Queensland here. So pretty much all the way from the bottom of Queensland all the way up the top, and even goes past the Queensland and up to Papua New Guinea.
And I just heard something too. It's about half the size of Texas in terms of the area.
Yeah, so it's really,
huge.
really large. And it's so cool because you can actually see it from space. So you can see just here, this aquary coloured part here, that is the Great Barrier Reef seen from space. So that is really, really cool. Now, in terms of just how big it is, it's around about 1,400 miles long. So I did the conversions for you, so it is in miles. So quite long, and at its widest point, it's around about 155 miles wide. So as Julie said, about half the size of Texas, or if you sort of think about a football field. So if you kind of picture in your head the size of a football field, around about 75 million football fields will fit inside the Great Barrier Reef. It's pretty far to run if you tried to run that one. Now, it's also a really, really diverse system. Lots and lots of different types of animals. Got over 1,600 different types of fish and over 600 species of coral. So coral is an animal. There's hard coral and soft coral. So we'll see some of those today. And then all sorts of other little creatures like your snails and your sea stars, your little crustaceans like shrimp, but then some really cool ones like sea snakes and turtles. We're quite lucky here in Australia on the Great Barrier Reef. We have 6 out of the 7 marine turtles found in the world. Plus, we've got whales, dolphins, and dugongs, and of course, those sharks and rays. Now, what I can see at the moment is our diver, Craig. He's in our coral reef exhibit and has lots and lots of fish swimming around him. So very shortly, we're going to pass over to him so we can see those animals and he can tell you a little bit more about them. But firstly, just quickly, you'll notice that there is a question and answer and a chat function as part of this webinar today. We're going to use both of those, but in different capacities. So if you have a question that you would like Craig or myself or Julie to answer, pop it in the question and answer function. But throughout our video conference today, we might ask you guys some questions as well. So when we ask you a question, pop the answers in the chat function. So a question for us, use the question and answer. If we've got a question for you, pop your answers into the chat. But otherwise, we are going to jump on over to Craig.
But how about we do our dive signals?
We can do that too, Julie.
So it might just teach the audience, because when you're underwater, we can't ask questions of the diver normally. And it's really important we can still communicate. So dive buddies, if you're here today and you're watching, and the most important dive signal, if you want to learn it, which one is it, Katie?
Okay.
So if I did that to you, if I was a diver, that's a question to you, isn't it?
It is a question, but Julie, it's also an answer. So if Julie was to ask me, are you okay? My response is, I am okay. So it's both a question and an answer when you are underwater diving.
And what about if I wanted to go up to the surface? What would I do then?
So if you go up to the surface, you go like this. So you're not saying, oh yeah, it's all good. You're actually saying, let's go up.
So I wonder what down would be. I wonder if any of our dive buddies would know. What do you think down is? I know you know. I'm going to guess it's this. Is that the dive signal for go down?
Yeah, Julie, you've got that one right. So if that's go up, then that is go down.
Now, there are questions already coming through. People are asking what types of fish we have. Do we have any sharks and those types of things? We do have lots of fish. We'll get to show you, and Craig will identify a few of them for you today. We do have sharks that we'll be able to show you, but it's towards the second part of the presentation. So we're in the coral tank right now, but we will cross to the predator tank with our sharks later on. So they are some of the animals, and today is all about the coral reef. So Katie and I will be able to hear what Craig's saying. You'll be able to hear us as well, and I'll just keep an eye on the questions, and Katie and I will ask them to Craig as we go, and listen out because Craig might be asking you questions along the way. So, right, Katie, I think we're ready.
I think we are ready. What I'm going to do is nice and quickly, I'm going to say, Craig, are you okay? All right, Craig is giving me a nice big okay back. So we're going to go and cross over to Craig. All right, here we go. Hi, Craig.
Hey, Katie. G'day, everyone. Welcome to Reef HQ Aquarium. My name is Craig. I'm going to be your underwater guide for the next hour as we explore some of the amazing marine life we get on the Great Barrier Reef here in the world's largest living coral reef aquarium. I'm in an exhibit or a aquarium that holds 660,000 gallons of seawater, and it's set up to represent an actual coral reef, much like Julie, Katie and myself could be snorkeling on just outside the back door of our aquarium here. We'll spend about half our time or thereabouts in this exhibit, and then my dive buddy, who I'll introduce you to shortly, will get out and get into the shark tank. And that's where we'll spend the remainder of our time. So as Julie says, we will see some sharks. Might be a bit sleepy at this time of day, but that's all good. Might be able to get up nice and close to them. So we'll see sharks, but a bit later in the presentation. I've got a full face mask on today so I can talk to you, I can hear you, I can hear Julie and Katie. So we'll be able to have a bit of a chit chat through the next hour. If I ask you a question, remember, put your responses into the chat. If you have a question for Katie, Julie or myself, put it in the Q&A function. We're going to have a great time over the next hour. So let's get started by introducing you. This is my diver signal to Cara May. Cara May's my dive buddy. Can you give Cara May a nice big friendly good morning wave? Cara May, okay. Oh, Cara's good to go. Let's get ourselves started. So you're my dive buddies today, whether you're in Washington, DC or wherever in North America, or even if you're quarantining down in Sydney, New South Wales, welcome. But let's stay together as a group of divers. We're going over this way. Katie and Julie gave a nice introduction to our Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. Now, the Great Barrier Reef is a coral reef ecosystem. So, which group of animals, and remember, put it in the chat, which group of animals builds the Great Barrier Reef? And to give you a good clue, I'm looking at one now.
Oh, Craig, we've got lots of answers of coral coming through the chat.
That's very good indeed. So what I'll try and do, I'll try and get nice and close with my super duper camera. I'm just trying to scope out what part of this coral colony I might be able to get up nice and close to, and maybe, just maybe, point out where the little animals are living. So, might be a little bit hard to see, but there are these little pits or little circles all over the colony. And that's where we have little upside down jellyfish-like animals. Those are the coral polyps. They live in a group such as this one that we call a colony. Now, Katie, did you tell me you had a picture of a coral?
Yeah, Craig, I've got a close-up picture of a coral colony and those polyps. Just popped it up onto the screen for all the students to see. So, Craig, can you describe those polyps a little more?
Yeah, certainly. So, as I say, a little bit like a jellyfish. This is the diver's hand signal for a jellyfish, by the way. But if you imagine a jellyfish that's upside down, it still has its tentacles, and that's how the coral polyps can catch food. And in the middle of their tentacles, that's their mouth. It's also their bottom. So they have a simple gut, food goes in, and waste goes out. Now, Katie, I was going to show a few different shapes of corals. I'm wondering if any of my dive buddies could have come up with a good name for this type of coral. It's a nice open coral shape. They come in all sorts of shapes.
Can you give us a clue? We've got a couple people saying it looks a little bit like a sea anemone. We will see sea anemones later. Do you have a clue? I have a clue, actually.
Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, I might put a bunch of flowers in them on the table. What would you put a bunch of flowers in?
Oh, I think.
Oh, yeah, we've got a few
We've got a lot,
answers
we
of
do.
vase and bowl coming through.
Yeah, good on you. And you know, this type of coral grows in this open shape to catch sunlight as much as to catch other food. I know that sounds strange, but let's have a bit of a look around our reef. There are over 600 described species of coral on the Great Barrier Reef. They come in all these different shapes. Here's another one. I reckon this one looks a bit like a green salad vegetable, although it's not green to us. What sort of salad vegetable resembles the shape of this coral?
Oh, we're getting lots of answers of lettuce, Craig.
Yeah, you guys have got it. So common names are a very good way to simply describe corals. Let me show you another lovely example up here. This is a little bushy coral. It grows like a little bush. Very pretty colours of pink, I can see. But I don't know if you've worked out already, boys and girls and adults that are joining us today, there's a similarity in the shade of colour that these corals have. To me, it looks like an orangey brown colour or a dark browny orange colour. And let me show you a few more shapes. We've got another sort of leafy coral over here. Grows quite flat and broad. Again, catching sunlight's important. Oh, wow. This is a tough question. I'm going to see if anyone knows what this is down here. It's not a coral, but it's a half-hidden other animal. He's sort of hiding in the coral structure. Does anyone know what that blue thing is? That's a tough question.
Oh, we've got octopus, sea snail, cucumber, slug, eel.
Well, I can see 2 of its 5 arms. How
Oh,
about that?
Craig, we've got a couple of answers that have come through that say it's a sea star.
It is. It's a blue Linkia sea star. He must be either just waking up or going to bed after a long night out. Now, over here, we've got a few more corals. There's another leafy one, a bit of a lettuce leaf coral. But I was saying they've all got this similar colour. Orangey brown, greeny brown. This one here, call that a honeycomb one. You can see it's got a bit of green as well as brown going on there. That brown colour, let me tell you a secret. The brown colour that we see in the coral is due to an algae that's living in partnership with the coral polyps. So those little upside down jellyfish-like animals, the polyps, they collect these single-celled algae out of the water, take them inside their skin, and those little algae make food for the coral from the sun's energy. All right, let's finish our guessing game down here. No real prizes for this one. It's too obvious, but what would you call this type of coral, dive buddies?
Yeah, Craig, we're getting lots of answers of a brain coral.
It's beautiful, that brain coral. They typically grow in a very boulder-like, robust form. and they're quite capable of surviving those occasional tropical storms just because they're all very well built corals.
Now, Craig, while you're looking at all those corals, we've had a question come through that asks, what do corals eat?
Yeah, well, anything and everything in the way of organic matter that's floating in the water column. It might be bits of dead animal and plant material. I don't know if you can see little specks floating around from time to time. That flotsam can be food particles the corals can take up. But there's also plankton, living larval stages of other animals, be it maybe teeny tiny baby fish, teeny tiny baby sea stars or sea cucumbers that are floating about in their planktonic phase. So, yep, they can eat any organic matter that comes to them courtesy of those currents. But remember, that's only part of the story. Most of the energy that those corals depend upon comes from the little algae. The algae living inside the coral skin gives it most of its energy. And this is why, Katie, corals are so sensitive, because that relationship between the coral polyps and the algae, it depends on certain environmental conditions. They're very fussy. That's the best way to describe our corals. They are very fussy animals. Now, you can see a lot of colourful, beautiful fish here. But what I might just make mention of, because I believe the year fives, grade 5 students in the Washington, D.C. school area may be interested to know about climate change and the effects of a changing climate on our Great Barrier Reef. And you know what, folks? Our corals, whether they're hard corals or they're soft corals, like this massive leather coral down here, climate change is the biggest threat to their health and survival in the future. So as our atmosphere slowly warms up and that heats up our oceans, that can upset that very special relationship going on between the coral and those little algae. And if it gets too warm, the algae will get kicked out by the coral, and the coral will lose that colour and bleach. So climate change is a real concern to the long-term health of our Great Barrier Reef. And we might come back at the end and think about what each and every one of us can do, no matter where we are, to maybe help out our Great Barrier Reef, including local ecosystems in your part of the world as well.
Now, Craig, just before you move on, since you were talking about climate change, we had a question come through asking, what actually is climate change, Craig?
Right, so with the burning of fossil fuels, things like burning of coal or the use of petrochemicals, petrol, burning of those fuels, we're releasing lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that's creating a blanket around the planet and preventing heat escaping from the planet. So our planet's atmosphere is beginning to warm up. As the atmosphere warms up, then our oceans begin to warm up as well. And as I said, those increased carbon emissions are creating more and more of a heat trap, causing our oceans to get slightly warmer. And this is the problem for the health of our corals. Our corals don't like water above about, I think it's in the 70s or very low 80 Fahrenheit. That's where corals begin to get upset if it gets too warm. So we need to keep those carbon emissions down and stop our atmosphere and oceans from warming up. I hope that's clear enough. Very quick response about it. But any other questions, I'll try and answer them as we go as well, Katie. Now, what I was going to do, I've drifted over this way. What I might do,
Now,
I'll sort of do a couple of things. I want to show off our fish. Goodness me, look at these lovely fish. But to do that, to begin that, I might finish off the coral story by going and checking out a close cousin of the corals up here. I'm just going a little bit higher in the water column, buddy, so I'm signalling to Cara May. We're going up. That's the way.
Now, Craig, before you go up all that way, we had a couple of other coral questions. Can I just ask 3 of them for you?
Yeah, for sure.
What different types of corals, in terms of what colours do they come in?
Yep.
And how long do corals live?
Oh, 2 fantastic questions. How long have we got? The colour of coral is predominantly that orangey, browny, greeny brown colour, and that's due to the algae inside the coral skin. But you get other pigments or colours produced by the coral polyps themselves. So coral polyps might be making sort of fluorescent green colours. There might be other purples or yellows or oranges or reds, and these can be, we think, part of their photoprotection, their sunscreen. So these corals are often living in those tropical waters, high levels of sunshine. That benefits the algae making food for the coral, but they need to screen out some of that really harsh sunlight. So those other colours, they're important for the coral's survival in those high lit environments. So you get lots of different colours, but a quick look on a coral reef and you see a lot of brown, greeny brown, due to the algae inside the coral.
And
really good colour to see a lot of.
Craig, we did have a question if corals glow in the dark.
Do they?
Yes.
They do actually. You can shine particular wavelengths of light, sort of that blue spectrum of light, and you can get those corals with green fluorescent pigments exploding into colour like a neon carnival. It's absolutely beautiful, and some corals that look a dull brown during the day, at night time with that blue torch, boom, they're just a fluorescent spectacle. So yes, you do get corals glowing in the dark under certain wavelengths of light. Then there was another question about how long does a coral live? Well, it depends. If we were looking after these corals, keeping the conditions just to their liking, there's no reason that these corals could not go on living indefinitely, because the way a coral grows is by budding off new polyps. So let's have a look. This one down here, little boulder coral. You can see where the polyps are in those little craters, I hope. Now, that would have started off as just one polyp, that colony, and that one polyp can divide and create a clone of itself. So the colony becomes 2 polyps, and those 2 polyps can divide, and so on and so forth. So as long as the conditions, the temperature, salinity, pH, other water quality parameters are suitable, that coral doesn't have a lifespan. It could go on living indefinitely. But, you know, there are things that happen on the reef. Oh, I'm just being distracted by some romance. There are things that happen on the reef that cause a coral to be damaged, a cyclone, disease, crown of thorns, starfish. Those sort of impacts can damage and indeed kill corals. Coral bleaching, coral mortality. Bleaching isn't necessarily the end of a coral. It can recover if the conditions change, but lots of things can impact and actually kill a coral if the conditions aren't to their liking. Now, Sort of a long answer there, Julie, but I was looking at these little black and white fish, and they might be a bit gun shy now, but there was a bit of romance going on. There they are, they're down there. They're called little humbugs. They're a damselfish, and they were just nesting and fertilizing eggs around here. So I'm going to back out, and I'll keep my eye on what's going on down there, and we might be able to catch them back at it shortly. Julie, any other questions to do with corals? Otherwise, signalling to Cara May. Going up now, Cara May.
I think what we'll do, we'll just keep going and showing some more animals. And if there are other questions, because we do have lots and lots of questions coming through, Craig, we might try to either type the answers back or answer them during our break.
Okay, so I'm at the crest of this part of the reef. We're only in a very small part of a big aquarium. But on the crest, you might be able to see a big window behind. That's one of our aquarium viewing windows. But what we're looking at here are a couple of, well, I don't think they need an introduction, do they? These are the Great Barrier Reef anemone fish. And they get their name because they live in association with a sea anemone. Now, if I can get in close enough, I'm going to show you the anemone's mouth in the middle. Remember, like a coral polyp, their mouth is also their bottom. So you can see the mouth in there. Just like a coral polyp, the anemone has stinging tentacles. Now, I never touch anything on the reef, but I'll show you. If I just see that, those tentacles are grabbing hold of my glove. They must think I'm a tasty meal. So that's how your anemone and your corals can catch food the water delivers. I'll just move around. I'm going to check out. This time of year, there's a lot of breeding going on, and I think our anemone fish might be preparing the surface around here to lay eggs. So they're a great breeding pair, are these anemone fish, a male and a female, and they will be nesting every 2 or 3 weeks. They're very productive.
Now, Craig, those anemone fish are swimming in amongst the stinging tentacles of that anemone, but why aren't they getting stung?
Well, it's one of those examples of a partnership between 2 different species. We call it a symbiotic relationship. In this case, both species benefit from each other. The anemone benefits because the anemone fish chase away anything that would like to come and nibble on its tentacles. So they protect the anemone, and in return, the anemone fish and they alone can swim through those tentacles without getting stung. They have a special slimy coating all over their body. That means they can use that anemone for their own protection. There they go.
Now, Craig, we have a few questions about the anemone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so a few people are asking if the anemone is swaying, is it actually moving or is it the water? And then the other question is, can anemones actually move about?
Yes, certainly that movement is passive, which means it's being buffeted by the prevailing wave machine that we have in here. So we generate currents to mimic water movement on the reef. So those tentacles, if we turned off our underwater fans and wave machine, that anemone would be still. Could the anemone move around? Yes. I'll just see if I can show you a bit of the foot. So they have a foot. Get in nice and close here. It's a dark red foot, and it sits attached to the reef. But if it didn't like that spot, if it wasn't a good current flow or sufficient light for the algae that's in its skin, that anemone could walk about on the reef. Not fast, but it can still move to a better spot. So yes, they can move if they wish to.
So apart from the fish, does anything else live in the sea anemones?
Yeah, you can get in certain species of anemone. You can get commensal or maybe even symbiotic animals like a little shrimp. You can get types of shrimps that might associate with anemones. And to be honest with you, invisible to the naked eye, there might be a whole community of other organisms, even down to the level of bacteria, associated with this anemone. I can't see it. You can't see it usually, but there could be a whole community of things living in there, really tiny organisms. Great questions.
Now, Craig, I'm a little conscious of the time, so we're going to slowly run out of time. But I do know that a little while ago we had a question about what are all those black things on the seafloor?
Yeah, that's great. I think I did mention the name of these animals when I was talking about planktonic larvae. Now, we call them the vacuum cleaners, and I'll show you why. I'll just drop down here with all my fishy friends. Here we go. This is a nice example. Now, these are, do I give the game away here, Katie?
Oh, why don't we see if the students can guess?
All right, into the chat, what do you reckon these sausage-shaped things are that we have in abundance?
We're getting a lot of sea slugs. Oh, I can see some sea cucumbers coming through the chat.
That's correct. So these are relatives of the perhaps more familiar sea stars. So sea cucumbers and sea stars are in the same group of animals or are closely related to each other. We call them vacuum cleaners because they pick up sand, not to eat the sand, but they want all the organic matter, the dead animal and plant material, the bacteria, any other nutrients. Oh, hello, Mr. Butterfly Fish. Any other nutrients that are in the sediment, they extract, and then out the other end comes sea cucumber poop. Now, I did see a nice patch. Where was that? This is a particularly hard-working sea cucumber, right down here, guys. You see these little pellets? This is the sea cucumber's drop. Now, if I pick it up, I want to squish that in my fingers. And all it is nice clean sand. So our sea cucumbers, like little vacuum cleaners, are turning over the sand and cleaning it, keeping the sandy seabed healthier for the other reef community or the other organisms that live on that sand. They're good at recycling leftover food and dead material. And you know what? It's a nice way of thinking about each and every element of the reef community. They all have a job to do. For example, many of the fishes that we have, let me just introduce you to a couple. I can see a hump-nosed surgeon. Oh, here comes a bird-nosed wrasse with the long orange mouth. There's Dory. They all have a particular diet that translates into a job. Let me explain. Where's Cara May? I'm going to give Cara May the camera for a moment, and I'm going to see what I've got in my glove here. I found some seaweed, algae. Here we go. Oi, that's my finger. Look at this. These are herbivores or herbivorous fish. And their job on the reef is like little lawnmowers. They're coming in grazing on the seaweed. They're not the only animals that eat seaweed. There's different species. from sea urchins and snails. And these herbivorous fish, the rabbit fish, that do a great job keeping that seaweed under control. We don't want the grass getting too long on the reef. We need our herbivores to graze it down. What? I'll let you guys finish that. So I might just take that back from Cara May, and we'll keep moving around.
All right, now, Craig, we've seen those herbivore fish. We've seen those building blocks of the reef being the corals, and we've seen the sea cucumbers that clean up everything. Do we have predators here at Reef HQ?
We do, and I've seen a few just in here. There's one coming towards me. That's a little red-toothed triggerfish. I've seen the bird-nosed wrasse. I've seen the butterfly fish, but I think you're referring to even bigger fish still. And they are living in a separate exhibit. Were you thinking it was about time we go for a dive and check out our sharks?
Yeah, so before you do, we just go, you've got the surgeonfish there. Can you quickly just ID these couple of fish, and then we'll go to the shark tank?
Yep, so Dory, you might be able to see the blue tangs. They're surgeonfish, but so too is the orange band surgeonfish here. You get many species in this family. The surgeonfish family takes its name from a sharp, scalpel-like scale on its tail. They use that for defense. Apparently it's as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. And just here's a predator doing some work over here. There's a goatfish hunting in the sand. Now the goatfish has big, long, sticky barbels, and he sticks them into the sand. Might stir up the sediment here. And he's looking for worms or any other sediment-dwelling creatures that he can find for a tasty meal. So that's our little goatfish. There's another type of rabbitfish there, the yellow one. So I think, Julie, all said and done, probably close to 2,000 species of reef fish could be described in time to come on our Great Barrier Reef. There's over 1,600 that have been described so far, but there's probably many more still to be properly scientifically recorded.
Now, are you ready to go and see the sharks, Craig?
Oh yeah, always ready to go for a dive with the sharks. How's everyone else? You ready, Julie?
I'm ready. Katie, are you ready?
I'm ready, Craig. So what we might do is jump back to the studio with me and Julie, and we will let Craig jump on into the predator tank. All right, so jumping on back over to us. Now, how was that? Was that awesome? It is always a lot of fun when we do get to jump into our coral reef exhibit and see all of those beautiful corals and all of those fish. Now, Craig and Cara, they're going to jump on out of the coral reef exhibit. So that is that tank right there. That's the tank that they were just swimming in. And they're going to walk all the way down here and jump in the tank. Oh, not very good at this pointing thing. Jump into our predator tank, which is under the roof just here. So it's going to take them just a couple of minutes. So while we are here with us, Julie, we've been having lots and lots of questions coming through our question and answers section during this. And we haven't been able to answer them all. I'm really sorry about that. But what we'll try and do is answer a couple of those while we are in this session here while Craig is jumping into the predator tank. So Julie, what's some questions that we've got?
Well, some of the questions we've had, a lot of people are really keen to see our sharks and know what types of sharks there are and how many species of sharks there are. So there's 136 different species of sharks that can be found on the Great Barrier Reef. So that's pretty amazing. That's sharks and rays. And in our predator tank, how many different types do we have, Cara? Sorry, Katie. Cara's in the tank today. What do we have? We have the leopard shark.
Yep.
The tawny nurse shark.
Yep.
The black tip reef sharks. And the other type of shark that we have
is a nervous whaler.
Nervous whaler. So we have 4 species, plus we do have a ray, but it's not a stingray. What is that one?
So it's called a shovel-nosed ray. And quite often, a lot of people ask me whether or not it's actually a shark or a ray. So when you have a look at it, you're going to notice it does look a little bit sharky. So Julie, what is the best way to tell the difference between a shark and a ray?
Well, I like to think, if you think of a shark that's been squished flat, that's a ray. Okay, so rays have a very flat shape, and also their gills are on the underneath part. So on sharks, you can see their gills, which they use to help them breathe, on the sides of their heads. On rays, they're underneath. People also ask us if we have stingrays, and we do have stingrays on the Great Barrier Reef. I actually saw a stingray just the other day while I was snorkeling, which was fantastic to watch. We do have stingrays here in the aquarium, but they're in much different tanks. They're not in the predator tank. We do have our shovel-nosed ray in here today. So they are some of our shark sort of introduction, but we will show you the sharks up close really soon when Craig jumps in the tank. So someone asks about what is the biggest fish in the reef, and that's someone from Wagga Wagga. So that's interesting because Wagga Wagga is in Australia. So what's our biggest fish that we have on the reef? I'm thinking maybe the Queensland groper is one of the largest fish.
Yeah, so the Queensland gropers are what are known as the largest bony fish. And the reason why we actually specify bony fish is because technically sharks and rays are still types of fish, except they're what are known as cartilaginous fish because their skeleton is made of cartilage. Now that's what makes up our noses and our ears. And sharks and rays can get larger than the Queensland groper, but in terms of those bony fish with a skeleton made of bone like us, the Queensland groper is the largest one. And we do have one here in our tank. Really cool thing about the one we have in our tank, his name is Roger. But when Roger first came to Reef HQ, Roger was called Rosie and was also tiny. Now, Julie, how come Roger's name got changed from Rosie to Roger?
Well, in some species of fish, they can actually change sex when they mature. So when they get to a certain size, they might change from a male to a female. And that happens in the anemone fish that we see before. So some of the males will change to females when they get big. And in the Queensland groper, it's actually the reverse. So they start life as females, and when they get to a certain size, they change to a male. So when we knew that Roger got to that size where he was going to be a male, we changed the name from Rosie to Roger. So that it doesn't happen in all marine life, but it is very common in different types of reef fish. Now, there's other questions that we've had coming in. There was a lot of questions about, do we have sea turtles? And we do have sea turtles on the Great Barrier Reef. We have 6 out of the 7 species of sea turtles on the reef. The one that we don't have here is the Kemp's Ridley. But fortunately, we can't show you any turtles today. We do have a turtle hospital here at the aquarium, but all of our turtles have actually been released back to the ocean, which is pretty fantastic. But I wanted to share with you, I actually got to see turtles coming out, little baby turtles coming out of the sand just on the weekend. I was so excited. It's something that's very special to see. I've never seen it before, but there was a flatback turtle. It's one of the Aussie turtles. It only nests in Australian beaches. And it had laid its eggs, and it actually had laid its eggs in a nest way up in an area which was really hot and exposed. And last year, the nests around that area, the eggs got really cooked and they didn't hatch, and it was very sad. So this year, the wildlife rangers that are here in Australia decided to relocate that nest into a shady spot, and they relocated the eggs. So they did what is called an intervention. It was the very first one that they have done on that patch of beach. They put it in the shade, and the actual eggs hatched. So that was very exciting. There was 30 little baby hatchlings that hatched out of that nest and went down to the ocean during the evening. And I was lucky enough to go and see it. So just wanted to share that with you. It was very special, and we are very lucky that we have so much marine life here in Australia. So we're going to just take a few more other questions as well. So I thought we have more questions about, well, we have lots of things about fish. So we do know there's nearly 2,000 of fish on the reef. Someone asked what would happen if you touched corals or otherwise if we touched sea anemones. What would happen then?
Well, it depends on the coral or the sea anemone. So they do all have those stinging tentacles, which is what makes them corals and sea anemones. But some of them have a more powerful sting than others. So things like the anemone that Craig was showing you before, because it's got really long tentacles, it doesn't have very powerful stinging ability because it doesn't need it because those tentacles can wrap around the food. But then you've got other anemones, things like carpet anemones. They have tiny little tentacles, but because of that, the potency of their sting is really, really high. So if you accidentally touch one of those types of anemones, you're going to be in a lot of pain and you will be heading off to hospital. It's the same with coral as well. So sometimes if you touch those, you're not going to feel it, it's not going to hurt or anything, but you might hurt the coral. But then there are other types of coral like fire coral. Now, the reason they get called fire coral is because if you touch those, your hand is going to feel like it's on fire. Also, you need to be very careful with coral as well, because if you accidentally touch those and it causes a cut, it's very, very easy for that coral to cause an infection. Now, Julie, what I can see now is Craig is in our predator tank. So he has jumped back in and he has lots of predators swimming around him.
Including
Sharks.
This is a signal, isn't it?
Yes, so that's the dive sign for if you see a shark. So once again, I'm just going to check. Craig, are you okay? All right, I'm getting the nice okay sign back from Craig. So what we're going to do is jump back to Craig, who's now in our predator tank. All righty, here we go. Hi, Craig.
G'day, welcome back, everybody. So, Cara May and I are underwater in our shark tank, which is the same depth as our reef tank. In fact, if you turn it around, you might be able to see a bit of a tunnel, and that's the reef tank on the other side where we were before. So about 15 feet beneath the surface, and this tank houses lots and lots of fishes. So we've got these little grey damselfish that you'll see everywhere. They're very good at breeding in our tank. That's why we've got so many of them. But I suspect you're interested in some of these bigger fish. I can see over this way, we've got some sleepy sharks. So let me go and have a look. We've got a spotted shark. Here's my first question for you. What type of shark would be named after a big cat and it's got spots? I'll give you a clue. It starts with the letter L. Now, they can sit on the sea floor.
Oh, Craig, we're getting lots of answers of a leopard shark. Yeah. However, Craig, isn't it called something else over in America?
Well, yeah, in some parts of the world, they refer to them as zebra sharks because as newly hatched pups, probably up to the first year of their life, they actually have black and white stripes, and that's thought to give them a survival advantage, a bit of camouflage as young sharks. Now, this is our older female leopard shark. She's the mother of the other one we might see. So she's having a rest, much like she would like to have a rest, but this shovel-nosed ray just loves the camera, and every time comes and disturbs the other fish. Look, while they're in view, behind the leopard shark, blending in with our side of the aquarium, is a humphead wrasse. Napoleon wrasse, Maori wrasse. They go by a variety of names. There it goes. He is a protected species on the reef, which means the whole of our Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is a no-take zone for that species and this one. This is Roger, the big Queensland groper, or grouper you might refer to them. Now he can get up to 800 pounds. That's close to 400 kilos in our terms. So he's a big fish, but a long, long life ahead of him and much growth to come. I'm going to go around here. Let me know as and when the questions come through that might be appropriate, Katie, and I can try and answer those.
One of the questions was, is that shark sleep on the seabed because it's sleeping?
Yeah, they can rest. Might not be sleeping, but they can just sit still on the seabed because they've got muscles that allow them to pump water over their gills. So they don't need to swim like other shark species do and ram the water in their mouth and over their gills. You might be able to see gill slits on the side there moving as Leone, the leopard shark, pumps water over those gills. So she could be half asleep. I know this character over here. Let's go and have a look at my favourite shark, Mr. Snuggles. Mr. Snuggles is a tawny, that just means grey-brown in colour, tawny nurse shark. He seems to be resting with a big snapper called a mangrove jack. Look at the eye on that big fish. He's got big sharp teeth, all the better to eat smaller fish with. So the mangrove jack, very popular table fish. Recreational fishers love to catch a mangrove jack, but this is Mr. Snuggles. And sometimes I can get up close to Mr. Snuggles, the tawny nurse shark, and even give him a tickle on the nose. I don't know if I should today. Good morning, Mr. Snuggles. Give him a little pat. Now, if you were doing this, well, we wouldn't ask you to try and touch a shark, but if you could feel what I could feel, I know, mate. He's got quite rough skin because he's got little scales that we call skin teeth, and that gives him some protection. Oh, can I move the rocks out of the way? We have a look in your mouth today. Okay, you're going to let us have a look. Sometimes he'll lift up. So he's got teeny tiny eyes because he doesn't like to do much during the day. He likes to rest on the seafloor and get up at night and go hunting octopus, don't you? And he slurps up fish that are sleeping, octopus, and he crushes and grinds them up. He doesn't have big sharp teeth, but there are sharp enough sets of rows of teeth to crush up, grind up, lacerate up his favourite foods. So that's our tawny nurse shark. We'll let him have a bit more of a slumber.
Now, Craig, can I just answer a couple of questions that have come through? A lot of people have been asking if we had PJ sharks, and we don't have PJ sharks here. Some people have asked if we have lemon sharks, and there are lemon sharks on the Great Barrier Reef, but we don't have any in this exhibit to show you. Someone also asked, what is the biggest shark? And the biggest shark is one of my favourite sharks. What is that, Craig?
I guess on the Great Barrier Reef, do you mean, Julie?
Yes.
So that's the whale shark, and I've yet to see one in person. They're not a really common sight on the Great Barrier Reef, but they're a magic moment when people do see them. The whale shark is the biggest fish in the world. As Katie said, it's a cartilaginous fish. And yeah, it's the whale shark's the biggest shark. Now, I guess with much of what we have on display, we can only keep a small smattering of that wonderful diversity that we have on the Great Barrier Reef. And there are some species of sharks that wouldn't do well in a small aquarium like this. So that's why we've got particular types of sharks, just to show off some of that beauty of among 136 different types of sharks and rays that have been described so far on our Great Barrier Reef.
Now, Craig, just mentioning that not all sharks do well in captivity. We don't have great white sharks because that's one of the ones that don't do well in captivity. And also, we don't find great white sharks this far up in the tropics. They normally are in the colder waters. And a few people have asked us, are sharks important to a healthy reef?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question, and I think you could go safely and say every part of your natural reef community is important and needs to be conserved because each and every element has a particular niche or role to perform. So, whether it's a shark or any predator, their job is to control their prey populations. Here come a couple of little beautiful black-tip reef sharks. They're ones that never stop swimming. Could be half asleep for all we know because they have a bit of a snooze as they cruise. So there are some sharks that never stop, but they all have an important role to do. Our blacktips might eat small reef fish. Our leopard shark might eat crayfish and crabs and other shellfish in the sediment, small fish that are in the sand. So even these little damselfish could be described as a predator when they're feeding on other living organisms, the larval stages that are floating in the plankton. Each and every element of our reef has an important job to do. I chuckle because here comes Wally. That's what everyone calls a humphead rat. And he is a connoisseur of mollusks, little marine snails. And he'll put his big fleshy lips over the reef structure and then with a great big slurp, suck up a little snail and then munch it up with a second set of jaws he's got in his throat. So he's a very specialist predator and he keeps his favourite snails in the right abundance. I hope that answers that question, Julie.
Now, Craig, I am conscious of time as we have just gone over time. So we do need to finish up our video conference today. Do you have any last minute comments or things that you want to say before we finish on up?
Yeah, I do recall I said that we would touch upon what each and every one of us can do when it comes to thinking about climate change, reducing our contribution to carbon emissions. I want to reduce my carbon footprint. You can do similar. Here in Australia, a lot of our electricity comes from coal-fired power stations. So if I conserve the amount of electricity I use, switch off lights when I don't need them on, turn off appliances at the wall, if I choose to cycle to work or walk to work instead of driving a car, these simple steps contribute in a small way, but small actions matter. And each and every one of us can do similar. Whether you're in Washington, D.C., or another part of North America, or wherever in the world, you can think about reducing your carbon footprint. That'll help out the planet. That'll help out our Great Barrier Reef. So I'm very sad to have to say goodbye because I love diving and showing off our wonderful marine life. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I wish you a very wonderful remainder to your day wherever you might be. So from Craig and Cara Underwater, we'll sign off now from Reef HQ Great Barrier Reef Aquarium. Thank you for all the questions. See you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. We'll just jump on back to Julie and me here in the studio just to finish on up. So that was pretty cool. Got to see all of those predators swimming around. Now, hopefully today you have learned something and you can take away things on what you can do in order to help protect the Great Barrier Reef. Even though you're all the way over in the United States, even you can help the Great Barrier Reef and the marine system as a whole. All right, now just to finish on up, we might just quickly pass back to Megan just to see if she has any last minute comments that she would like to say. All right, Megan, just going to spotlight you. There you go.
Other than the biggest thank you for the most amazing dive tour of what you have in the facility and learning so much more about the reef and the fish and the sharks that were a lot less scary than I imagined. So I'm not as jittery anymore. I do want to reiterate everything that Craig said about just taking care of our environment. Everything we do here in DC and in Chicago still has ramifications for all of our animals across the globe. We are also going to be sending out information about the Great Barrier Reef so you can find out more. There were a ton of questions that came in, and we did our best to track what did get asked, and we are going to send out some more information about what you saw today, and also some questions that you may still have lingering. Please feel free to send us, because we know that the more you know, the better it is for all of us together, just to protect our animals, our creatures, our environment. But again, just a huge thank you for everyone attending today, and for Katie and Julie and Craig and the divers and the creatures that are there. And we're just so willing participants in this virtual experience abroad tonight. We, again, hope to visit you all soon. We'll definitely be visiting your website, and that will be going out, and as well as some other material and books for our families and students. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope you all have a good rest of your morning, your day, and everyone in the United States has a good rest of their evening. But thank you so much for having us.
All right, well, thank you very much for that one, Megan. We'll just jump back to us. As we just say a nice big thank you for all of you for joining us. And as Megan said, hopefully you all have a fantastic evening. And for those that are viewing from Australia, have an awesome rest of your day. So from us here in the studio, bye everyone. Thanks for joining us.
See you later.